So I'm Trey Hunner. I part of the San Diego Python meetup, got into Python shortly after graduating college, kind of by accident through some freelancing work I did. Used to do freelance work. Now I don't think of myself as doing consulting. I do training now, but it's same deal in the sense that I run my own business. Now I teach people instead of getting paid to write code for a living now.
Right. And by training, what's the main context? Is this companies? Is this universities, high schools? What does this training word kind of imply?
Yeah, this is companies. So I've never taught at a university, never taught at a high school. Well, I did go back into my old high school and give a talk to a class there from an old teacher of mine, but I've never actually taught something at an actual school. And so it's really just companies trusting me to help them by adding value to their developers to kind of multiply their skill level.
Cool. And this is your training now is a full-time in your regiments. You're no longer doing freelance programming work.
Yeah, that's right. So I used to get paid pretty much only to do consulting work, which was largely ended up writing code, but often it would start with, what even is the business problem we're solving, and then result in writing code. But now I don't do any of that anymore. I only do training.
Cool. And when was that switch over, right? Because that seems like a pretty, it was a gradual. Was it all of a sudden one day?
Yeah, that was, I want to say it was gradual, but it was all of a sudden in the sense that I think it was summer of 2015. Yeah, so about a year and a half ago, I had wound down kind of some of my last consulting projects for a little while, and I sort of had a lull, which I liked in a way, in the sense that I usually wouldn't go actively find new clients. I was pretty bad at that. When I didn't have work, I would just do stuff that would help me learn, or use my free time for meetups, that kind of stuff. And a big potential client reached out to me and just asked if I wanted to do training. I still don't know how they found me, and I don't really know why they trusted me, because they'd never worked with me before. And for some reason, they took a chance on me, and that kind of started my training career. I sent them a proposal. They said yes. I realized with the amount of money you can make with training, I could stop doing consulting and just do that.
Cool. And what is the kind of time commitment involved in, do you go for an intensive boot camp? Do you go once a week? What is the kind of metric of that?
Yeah. So typically I do special things for clients that are a little bit more local, because I can do odd things like do multiple classes at once and stretch them out over a couple of weeks. I wouldn't normally want to be in a city for multiple weeks at a time, though. That's not where I live. So normally I do either 3 full days, essentially 7-8 hour days, or 4 hours per day spread out over a week. So 5 days. So approximately 20-hour courses.
I see. And do you travel for these then? Oh.
Yeah, I travel for those. And I've been kept pretty busy by a local client, so I haven't had to travel much, but I have been traveling some.
And this is all in the US in general?
Yeah, I would in theory be fine with going elsewhere in the world, as long as I could manage the jet lag or whatever, but that just hasn't come up yet.
Right. And it seems like the in-person aspect is pretty important for this. In terms of the corporate training thing, did you get that sense that they really wanted someone in person to coach people and to go over stuff? Yeah,
I do. And I get the sense that, especially the smaller the company and the fewer people they have, they know the direct value they want to get out of it. Whereas the larger the company, if they fill a room with a whole bunch of people, they're taking a little bit more of kind of a shotgun approach, where they say, we don't know exactly what value each individual is going to get. We just know they're interested in Python. They're interested in this particular material. And so the smaller companies are kind of more fun to work with sometimes, because I can cater to their specific needs if I know it. And that's kind of fun in that way. Now, as far as on-site versus remote, I could do remote training. I haven't yet, though.
Right. And do you think that's a common thing, or is that not as much? Because, if a remote training could just be they're just going to watch a bunch of videos online or learn them by themselves, because having you there in person seems a big value.
Right. So one thing I've learned a lot about in the last few years that I wish I'd actually learned about more with consulting was marketing and sales. And that's something I wished I'd looked into more in school, really. And so one thing I've been thinking about is I've got this big product, which is training, at the top of a theoretical kind of product ladder. And below that could be remote training, maybe 10 times cheaper. Below that could be a course that you pay for that doesn't involve me really at all, that it is just those videos, that would be cheaper than that. And then maybe below that is a book or something.
Right.
I only have the top level. And so I'm planning to work down eventually, probably with remote training next, because people who don't know me aren't going to trust me for that big ticket item unless they have some other trust from talking to me, meeting me, knowing me, something like that. And so I've kind of gone in reverse. I know that after, looking into marketing and sales a little bit, you're supposed to go up the product ladder to gain trust. I'm down, but I do plan to do remote training and then eventually a video course, which is lower value, but if you're charging less, people do want to pay.
Right. And also, all this is interesting because your ladder analogy is cool because it is it's a continuation, right? It's all building up your core set of materials, your skills, your things. It's not like you're doing X and then Y and Z is totally related. It's all part of your knowledge base, right? That you're building up. It's just different formats and fidelities.
Right. And really, no matter what, risk reversal kind of guarantee I have, even if I said 100% money back, you're still wasting your time with me if I didn't deliver. And so there's kind of varying levels of trust. Buying a book from someone requires almost no trust. You spend a little bit of money. If the money's lost and the book wasn't good, great, you part your ways, no hard feelings. But building that trust up, I think, is a really important part.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. So in terms of just kind of planning, because I think one of the things you mentioned is cool is that, in these smaller companies, you could customize and cater and such. So do you feel you have some core set of materials you've developed over the years for Python training, and then you can kind of customize it? Or is it like a lot of work for each company to do something different?
That is a great question. So over the years, theoretically, I should have built up some kind of big training thing. What happened is the first course I did was an intro to Python course. And I told them I would be comfortable doing this training, maybe I think I said like a month from now or something, or 2 months from now. And I told them up front, I haven't done training like this before. I have taught workshops, with volunteers and such. I've made curriculum, but I've never made curriculum for a course like this. So I need time to make this. I think it ended up taking me, when I timed myself, about 10 hours per hour of in-person training for the curriculum development. It took me a long time. I think I probably could have taken less time if I wasn't a little bit more of a perfectionist than I should be, because I made it with restructured text and Sphinx, and it was kind of a class website as opposed to slides because I do all my coding live. And it was unique, and I think it was maybe a little bit too unique that first time through because it took me so much time. But really, it was worth it because I've managed to reuse that curriculum and only tweak it slightly every time for that particular class.
Nice. Yeah, the 10-to-1 ratio it's not that atypical, right? Even for traditional teaching, especially the first time you're getting a class started. There's all this behind the scenes stuff beyond just your regular curriculum. So that's really neat. So how much. I guess I've never been in this kind of corporate training sort of setting. So how customized or hands-on can you be with that versus just the prototypical, the other extreme of the spectrum is the prototypical large university lecture where someone is just talking and that's it, right?
Yeah, so I think this probably really varies based on the trainer, but the way typically my clients are comfortable doing it is no homework at all. The only time that I am able to use of my students is while we're together in the room. And so anything that involves them doing something for the purpose of learning Python has to be done together, which means I try to, as much as possible, teach something, spend 15 minutes teaching a thing, pause, have them do exercises for 15 minutes or so on that thing that we learned, hopefully maybe applying some knowledge from something else that we've learned already, and then move on to the next topic. And so I try to get them to apply things as quickly as possible with many exercises. And I do all of my coding live. Now, that's probably not necessary. The reason I like doing all of my coding live is because I encourage students to kind of shout things out in terms of questions about what I'm doing so that we can go off the rails a little bit. And that can be really nice sometimes because they'll often segue me right into my next topic.
Yeah, that's really nice. Yeah, I think that that point you brought up was interesting. I should file that away in my head in the sense of it makes total sense, right? In a company setting, you can't expect people to spend homework time, right? Because even taking the class is time out of their work days. So like,
Right.
Unlike in a university where they have students have all the time in the world for homework, you have to self-contain everything, which is really fascinating. And so do you find that there's enough time for them to get actual hands-on practice, if they're only there for an hour or 2 or 3 or so forth?
Yeah, it's hard to tell sometimes because I don't really get much contact with most of my students after the class ends. I do give a lot of them my info. Some of them I have kept in touch with, especially with the local companies I've worked with. But most of them that I have kept in touch with, they were already pretty excited about Python and using it before they went to the course. They had the perspective of, I'm not learning programming. I'm a C, C++, Perl, Java, some other programmer, and I need to learn how Python sees the world. And so they'd already been doing it hands-on without knowing what they were doing, just copy pasting other people's code on their teams. And so it's hard to tell how much it was my course, how much it was their own learning that did grow their skills. But I do feel like I can see students progress from day one to the last day in terms of certain core fundamental things. They may not understand how classes work by the end, or be able to really understand how list comprehensions work and why, but they seem to get the fundamentals of kind of scoping in Python, loops, the basics of what they already knew and how it applies to Python. And I think that's the easiest to learn in general. If you already know a topic and you're able to relate it to something else, it makes it a lot easier to learn. Yeah,
I mean, this is really interesting because if these people are professional programmers or data people already, they know fundamentals of program, they know how to program in Java or whatever, and it's a lot of it seems like a translation issue of, we're showing how this works in Python, you just need to get the muscle memory to practice, or right. Some things you think about differently because the for loops in Python are different than your C style, for int I equals 0, blah blah, for loops. So your audience is not like CS 101 students who have never programmed, I assume then.
Right. Sort of. So some of them they were electrical engineering, or they were actually, material science or something where they might have sneaked out with not really doing programming in school and learning it formally, but they've done it on the job to some extent. And more than that, even if they've done programming, sometimes they don't know about object-oriented programming, or they know about it in theory. So then when they see classes in Python, it's a little bit mind-blowing. Or if they do know object-oriented programming, sometimes it's even harder because they see the world in terms of Java. So I do still have the problem of a diversity of students from a diversity of backgrounds and trying to teach all of them. The one thing, there are certain things I can take a shortcut on though, like saying that Python does not have for loops, we have for in loops or for each loops. That's kind of an equalizer there, because nobody's probably coming from a language where they're used to that, or if they are, they're used to for each loops.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. It's a really different audience than the traditional college or high school type audience that people think about traditionally. CS education or programming education is like, we assume you don't know anything or you just had high school math and we need to build you up from the beginning. But your audience is interesting because either they're, like you said, professional Java or C++ programmers, or they're scientist type people who learn to program on the job without ever doing a CS degree. So they might have misconceptions or weird notions of stuff. And then when you show them something more structured, it's like either a light bulb goes off in their head, like, oh, wow, like I was doing this manually the whole time, I can now reuse code, or it's hard for them to get it because they're coming from a different angle. So It's an interesting.
Yeah, and certain things are a lot easier because of that. Like the fact what a function even does, that's a difficult thing I found to explain to a new programmer. I usually like to show functions after we've done some other constructs so that we can show that, bundling up your code can be useful for reusability. They get functions, but then they won't get things that I'll bring this up a lot of times in class, probably 3 or 4 days. I'll try to reiterate the fact that variables are not buckets that contain things. They're references to things in Python. That's a big mind blower for a lot of C programmers.
Yeah, and that's part of my Python tutor tool. I mean, that's a big part of it is drawing these diagrams, right? That the idea is that a variable is a name somewhere that references a thing, and then you could, the arrows change when you reference it, but it's not like a variable. I mean, if I made this for C, actually I do have the Python tutor does have a C version, and in the stack, there are literally boxes. So a box in the stack frame is a thing, and then when it changes, it just changes. But C has pointers too, so your box can be a pointer or something else. Yeah, I think that's why these visualization tools are really helpful, because when they actually see it, or when I'm sure if you draw diagrams, when they see it with the right model, everything makes sense. But yeah, the C model is just totally, I think that totally will confuse people.
Yeah, I'll be doing training in a couple of weeks actually, and I've realized a couple of my examples I probably should bring up Python Tutor for, because I've linked someone to Python Tutor. What was the example? A list with a single item 0 multiplied by 3. It's a list of 3 zeros. You take that and multiply it by 3. Now you've got 3 of the same list.
Oh, right. They all reference the same. Yeah,
right?
I like that.
And that really trips people up. And so that's one of those great examples. Another thing that I do is I tweet out a Python oddity just about every week or so. And I do those partially as excuses to think up weird examples to show in class, because showing how a language breaks, while it does get people a little frustrated with Python, it does show them that there are edges of the language that they might have trouble with.
Yeah, I really like that multiplying example. And that when people try to make like a matrix in Python, like a 2D matrix, they don't do it right, then they're actually making a list with references to 3 of the same list of zeros. And then when they modify it, they all modify. Yeah, it's cool because when you show it prints out, it actually looks like a matrix, but it's actually, there's only, a thing there. Yeah, the Python tutor definitely does that well. It doesn't lay out very well, because right now the layout's super simple. I don't have an optimization for like the graph layout, but all the things are topologically correct, right? All the arrows are topologically correct. It just may not, when you have complex cases, they may shift around and stuff.
Yeah.
But that's a great example. Another thing I was just instrumenting lately is trying to visualize like generators. So, the new Python 3 has these generators that you can pass 2 ways, right? There's this yield from thing. So there's 2 things. We can talk about this next week on your live thing too, but you can both pass data into a generator and get data out of a generator. And you can also have a generator delegate to like another generator. Right. So that makes the control flow super crazy. But if you actually view it in Python Tutor, it just steps through one at a time and you just see exactly what's going where.
Nice.
So that's another example that works right out of the box. I was actually going through some of Guido van Rossum was giving some tutorials on like generators and all those things, and I was able to visualize some of those examples. So yeah, I should definitely check it out for those cases.
Yeah, teaching yield from that seems like it could be useful for.
Yeah, and the thing with the Python tutor now is that it doesn't automatically visualize these super well, but I think the best use case, we should really talk about this next week, the best use case is an instructor like yourself who is well trained in it, plus using the tool. So when you're an instructor, you can go through it and explain it verbally and fill in the blanks for where the tool isn't diving into as much detail.
Right. Or even just find examples where it does work well and use those in the visuals.
Exactly. Yeah, I think coming up with good examples in general is good, right? That you need to come up with something compact, but yet sophisticated enough to demonstrate your case.
That is my hardest, the hardest thing that I do actually, I think, is when making curriculum, coming up with, I think of them as exercises. Sometimes there'll be an example, but even if it doesn't end up as an example, it's something I can ask a student to do themselves. I can come up with exercises, right? Yeah. But it's hard to go, here's a topic that I want to teach. What exercises can I come up for that topic? The opposite is a lot easier. I have an exercise, what does it teach? It's just so difficult to do the reverse.
Yeah, and coming up with examples is really hard. And I often see textbooks or materials online with examples that are too convoluted for beginners, or even there's really silly things like naming. One of the things I have in examples that I really like to do is just have everything have a unique name, right? So sometimes, people just shadow variable names because they're lazy and they say X is on the outside, there's another X, and there's another X here. And, the instructor knows what the X means, but it's just a little bit more cognitive load on the student. It's like, wait, is this the X here or is this the global? Unless you're obviously trying to demonstrate different scopes. But a lot of examples, people just name stuff, generic names that just confuse people because there's several things that are similarly named. So even naming is, seems trite, but naming seems really important.
Right. Yeah. XYZ, foobar, baz. I see those in blog posts all the time. I hate it when there's a new topic that's being explained using filler variable names, because that just doesn't jive well for me. I mean, it's hard to make your kind of mental model without a real world thing to think about it in context of. Analogies are, I think, a lot more important.
Yeah, I mean, I like the examples of, if you want to calculate, if you want to demonstrate a function for some math thing, but you just say this is like an interest rate or something. So we have a principal, a balance, an interest rate, a multiply, rather than define X, Y, Z and X times Y or something.
Yeah. And so another interesting thing about my courses is, unlike teaching, so I've done some volunteering with an organization in San Diego called the League of Amazing Programmers, which is an after-school program. It was pretty fun while I was doing it, but it was difficult for me to find the time to do that, especially because I'd have to leave for a week to do training somewhere.
Right.
But while I was doing it, we'd be teaching middle schoolers and high schoolers, and it was an after-school program. They wanted to be there to learn code, but they didn't have a thing that they wanted to use code for. They just knew they wanted to learn it. It's kind of the opposite when I do training on site. They know they want to learn a language, but often it isn't just their manager said, learn Python. It's you need to learn Python to solve this particular task. And so whenever I'm teaching them something, they're going, is this a way I could use this new thing we're learning today in what I'm trying to create, 2 weeks from now for that deadline. And so they're often asking me about that after class, which gives a different perspective.
Yeah, it's really different. Yeah, that's another way. I mean, we can think about the corporate training versus the school, traditional school. And that's another big difference, right? Is that in a school setting, people struggle to come up with applications or motivating applications. But in your setting, it may be the opposite, that maybe you want to show people an overview of Python, but they're just like, no, I want to just, what do I need to solve my problem right now?
Yeah.
And do you have thoughts on, let's say a slightly different note, what about, because when you mentioned earlier of all these people who are programmers, but they're self-taught or they're coming from mechanical engineering and stuff, do you have thoughts on, would there be value in offering some kind of a training class for kind of CS fundamentals or more elegant fundamental CS concepts? I may not be as quote unquote practical, but it kind of maybe connects the dots for these self-taught programmers. I mean, this less, there's less of a direct business case for that, but do you think there's some value in that? Perhaps?
Yeah, I think you could probably make a business case for some of it, and I bet you could focus on just that part. For example, teaching regular expressions is something I get a lot of asked for, and part of that is, folks who use Python, sometimes they're doing data munging or they're parsing log files, or if they're coming from, if they see Python as a Perl replacement, regular expressions are what they live and breathe. They want to know how those work in Python. And that kind of gets a little bit into, formal language automata theory kind of stuff. Also, not necessarily data structures, but getting into what a data structure kind of is at a surface level and what the time complexity is like. That's a thing that I feel like I didn't learn well enough in school because I wasn't paying enough attention probably. But I know well enough to get by. For the simple data structures. And I feel like a lot of folks didn't really pick up. They don't know that a hash map-like structure, a dictionary works one way and a list or array works another way.
Yeah, you can, that's an argument for, if you want your code to run more efficiently, you're munging data, you're doing a lot of sorts of work where performance might be more critical. Because there's always this tension, right, that we have, as university educators, there's always this tension of, look, people are paying however much money for a university CS degree, we're giving them all this useful foundational knowledge, but really a lot of programming is a craft and people can be self-taught, it's really practical. So there's always this tension between fundamental CS principles and, knowing the latest frameworks and the practical ways to do things. And obviously the best working programmers have both, right? Right.
I almost feel like if you can find a practical application for it, like those cases we discussed, it also makes it easier to learn, because like NumPy, Pandas, there's a couple things that I know that are on my hit list of things to learn from me because I don't have a background with them. And people have asked me about. And the reason they've asked me about them is because they may not even know the math side of things well, but they've been able to pick it up because they had an application for it. Whereas when you're learning something like statistics and you don't have an application, it's really hard to get an interest in it.
Yeah, that's great. One of my earliest podcasts was the guy who was talking about teaching statistics using programming. So he runs a big data science class at UC Berkeley, and that's part of their philosophy, is that instead of having statistics as a bunch of boring math equations, we are just, we're running a simulation. We just code a bunch of random numbers and running simulations and doing data analysis and stuff. Then there's a ton to talk about. So we got a bit of time left. I guess we can segue a bit into talking about this kind of building up a audience for your business thing, right? How are you able to go from not having any training, people to now having a thriving business event? What ways did you build up that audience?
Yeah, so audiences I have mixed feelings on. So there are things that I know I should be doing, and there are things that I actually do. As far as getting consulting and training work in the door, I've been pretty bad about proactively building up an audience, a kind of prospective client base. The thing that I accidentally did correctly that worked really well for me is meeting people and making connections, which some people might call networking. I didn't think of it as networking, which is probably why I was able to do it and still feel good about myself. I go to meetup events, and I really went to my local meetup mostly because I was a solo kind of freelancer. I often didn't get to chat with a lot of other programmers, and people sort of like me. So I went to meetups, ended up meeting a lot of folks there who referred work to me because they remembered me as Trey, the one who does Python freelancing, because that's what I told everyone I did. And so people knowing where I fit in their world and how they could use me in a positive way, how they could make a connection between someone they knew and me. Because making connections between people it's a really enjoyable thing to do if you do it.
Yeah, it's gratifying for both parties, right? It's like you feel you help someone else. Yeah.
Exactly. All three of you should get something out of it if you've made a connection. So referral work that way was actually really helpful for me. I didn't do that on purpose, but it ended up working out really well. Now doing training, I really cannot run into people who need my services by accident at a local meetup. They're all over the place, and they don't necessarily go to the same places I go. So I've written blog posts that teach Python. I've tried to do a little call to action at the end to say, if you like my teaching style, contact me. That's worked one time so far. I'm also planning to kind of have so I have a big mailing list of folks because I do this weekly Python chat thing. That's a different audience though. I do need to make a list for folks who might be potential training clients. So for example, things to look out for when you're hiring a Python trainer. Even if you don't hire me, I want to make sure you hire someone who's good for your team, because there's no reason you shouldn't. There's so much work for Python training to go around that no one of us could do it. And so I may as well empower you even if you're not going to hire me. And if I do so, it probably builds your trust in me a little bit. Maybe we'll become friends eventually. Maybe we'll become, you'll be my client someday. But making friends is kind of the main way I've found clients, regardless of whether it's the friend becomes a client or they refer someone to me. But that's kind of I guess the main thing I learned after college is making friends is difficult when you don't have a school around you or some kind of work environment. And doing so in a way that's somewhat related to your business is really beneficial, even if you don't end up working together.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And this is the kind of organic, I call this kind of organic network thing of if you're all in a space together intellectually that you're interested in similar things, then it's, every interaction doesn't have to be a straight up business interaction. Like, oh, what, do you need work now? I can provide this. It's all just, I'm interested in this. You may be interested. Most of it doesn't go anywhere, but if you're all in a similar space of Python stuff or technical stuff, eventually with enough in and out flow, stuff will happen. So I think that's absolutely right. And this is another thing for why college and universities are such a powerful environment, because by default you have that, right? You have hundreds of people with a certain shared context that are doing similar things together, and it's very hard to get that outside college. I totally agree.
Yeah, absolutely. That is probably the biggest thing I missed coming out of college was accidentally meeting people as being something that just happens. Doing it proactively. I'm an introvert. Maybe I'm an ambivert at this point, but regardless, I have to put on my extrovert hat a little bit when I'm going to go meet someone new. And I've learned how to do that in a way that's a little bit more comfortable for me, but it's an acquired skill. And Twitter has helped with that a lot. Conferences, meetups, and Twitter, because you're all there for a shared reason, or at least at meetups and conferences you are. And on Twitter, you can find, actually, I probably found you through Twitter. I'm pretty sure I did.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, probably. Yeah.
And that's, now we're chatting over a hangout because I found you through Twitter. And I've met people at conferences that we recognize each other because we saw each other first on the internet. So just a kind of slight introduction can be really helpful.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that part of this, both the slight introduction and because everyone's attention spans are so short, and having this, it's like you're saying, Trey is the Python training guy, right? It's like if you have a thing that you do that you're good at doing, you've done before, then people remember you for, oh, he or she does X. Oh yeah, next time, I'm in San Diego or something, I remember talking to that person or emailing that person quickly and saying, oh, can you refer me to someone else that's related? So yeah, I think this being in the same intellectual space is really key.
Yeah.
Cool. So we got a few more minutes. So I guess any last parting thoughts you have about, advice you would give to people going down this career path, or, things you wish you had done differently when you started out? Just any kind of last random thoughts you have.
So something I wish I had done differently is to take more marketing, sales, kind of business classes in school, especially the idea of value, because there's cost, there's price, and there's value. How much it costs you needs to be less than the price you charge, and the value that your client gets out of it needs to be greater than that price. Ideally, they're orders of magnitude greater, so everyone's happy. And that concept there is something I learned on my own, and I kind of knew it intuitively. But when someone puts words to it, you think about it a lot more, in a more structured way. So taking more marketing, sales, and business classes in general would have been really helpful. I honestly think if I'd taken less math and electrical engineering and a little bit more of that, it probably would have accelerated my career a little more. Also, you don't necessarily have to take the same path as anyone else. I fell into freelancing right after school. I had, a big safety net, a lot of privilege. I knew that I could always just move back in with my parents, and I'd always be able to eat something and survive, if nothing else. And I would probably be able to get a job eventually doing something. So I had that confidence and that privilege there. Not everyone has that. Take whatever you have and kind of embrace that, and try your best to keep going down that path. Meetups can be a huge accelerator there, because sometimes people at a meetup that you meet will lend you a hand in a way that costs them 10 minutes and saves you 4 hours of time because you just didn't know something. So, connections, making connections in the real world, whether you see them as friends or you're seeing the world as, a networking kind of person. I prefer to see people as friends. You can really help other people, and they can help you in ways that are lopsided, less work on their part, more help on your part.
Yeah, I think that's a great message. I think that'll appeal to a lot of students who are watching this also. But yeah, I totally agree with this idea of there are things that take me 30 seconds to say, and it will save someone 10 hours just because I have this in my cache. I've experienced this way more times before. And if someone finds a good way to ask, I try to write a lot on my website to kind of share this information out there, but students coming up to me in office hours after class and stuff, I think that's absolutely right. This sort of thing where you have such an amplification what you can get just from a really simple ask. Okay, this is awesome. Well, thank you so much. We'll go offline. We can chat for a bit more, but thank you so much for doing the podcast.
Cool. Thanks, Philip.